There's a new kid on the block. Actually, she's a pretty talented lady from Jackson who has taken the literary world by storm. Angie Thomas's first novel, The Hate You Give, has found its way to the New York Times bestseller list. And we're proud to have her here on Conversations today. Number one, I feel like I should get your autograph. What a year you've had.
It has been crazy in the best way.
You're home now. You're in Jackson.
Yes.
Okay, so just letting you know that.
Yes. I just got home, went yesterday?
Wow.
And so it was my last trip of the year, and I think I kissed the ground. I've never been happier to see Mississippi.
Bet you have. I mean, how busy has the publisher kept you?
It's been multiple publishers, and that's been the issue.
Oh, okay.
So everybody's been sending me everywhere. I've been on the road since February. So I think I've spent maybe 2 or 3 weekends at home this entire year.
You had to introduce your mom. I'm your daughter.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, she's in the studio right now, so I don't want to make her mad. So.
Yeah, I think I had to remind her of who I was.
Exactly. Here you show up the back of the book cover.
Like, that's
me. That's me. Well, seriously, congratulations. I mean, to walk up to the plate your first time at bat and literally hit it out of the park.
Yeah. It's amazing. I'm really honored to even be in this position. And as somebody who grew up here in Jackson, in Georgetown. Yeah, and before this, I'd never left the state of Mississippi. I think I've made up for it.
Yes, you have. I loved it. The first international trip you were going to make, you were flying, I think, to England, and the plane broke down and you had to turn around and go back.
Yes.
At what point did you want to open the door and just jump out?
We were headed back to Texas.
Yeah. It's like, okay, I'm going home. You could just send my video over. That'd be fine. I'll Skype.
Yes.
I'm good. So I want to talk a little bit about, obviously, your past and how you got to this point, but let's continue on. I mean, over 100,000 copies sold so far this year alone.
Yeah.
Wow. And movie. Oh, by the way, there's a movie in production, too.
Yeah. We're on our 21st printing.
21st?
Wow. Which is wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been on the New York Times list since it came out, which I never expected.
Debuted at #1, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, this guy named John Green kicked me off the spot. I don't know if you've heard of him.
He's done okay, but he described your book as stunning.
He did.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can't be too angry.
Did you just take a picture of that and walk around and show everybody?
I did.
Yeah. John Green's stunning. I mean, John Green, when you think of young adult novels, he's the king of it.
He is.
Yeah.
He is. So to even have him go around and promote the book, they said every event he does, he talks about my book, and that's incredible.
Really?
Yeah.
But, like John Green talks about some pretty tough topics.
Yeah.
And so do you.
Oh, yeah.
And you had the courage to do that. And, I mean, and we're going to, I think, the thing is so amazing. Of course, it hit right about the time that the Black Lives Matter movement really caught on. But there was an incident way before that inspired this story. So you actually caught the wave before it even was a wave.
Yeah, it feels like that. It really does. It was Oscar Grant for me.
San Francisco, right?
Yeah. His death really hit me and inspired me to write the book.
Yeah.
I was at Belhaven at the time, and I felt like a fish out of water at times because I was the only Black student in the creative writing program.
And the first one to graduate.
And that's just because the program was young. I love Belhaven.
Yeah.
But it was still a struggle at times, and Oscar made the struggle a little harder because some of my classmates had opinions about Oscar that I did not agree with.
Right.
So it led me to write the story because my only other option was to burn up campus, and I don't want to do that.
They tend to kick you out if you do things like that. And they take away your birthday.
Yeah.
So, not a good thing. I see the protagonist of the story, Star Carter. She's 16, right?
Yes.
Yeah, 16. I see a lot of you and her.
Oh, yeah, I've been told that.
Because she goes to an all-white academy school, and so she has to live between two worlds.
Right.
And you had to do that.
Right.
She witnessed a murder when she was very young. You witnessed a shooting.
Yes.
Talk about that, because your mom, who is in the studio, I did mention that.
Yeah.
Because she's looking at me right now. I don't want to make her mad. I've read that after that happened, she took you to the library to show you that that's not what the world was like.
Yeah, definitely. I was at Oak Park here in Jackson, in Georgetown, and two drug dealers, I guess they decided to recreate the Wild Wild West and have a shootout. And there were a lot of kids on the playground at the time, and they didn't seem to care about that.
Wow.
So I ran in the opposite direction. Luckily, I didn't get hit by a stray bullet or anything, but I ran onto Martin Luther King Jr. Drive.
Really?
I rode my bike all the way to Martin Luther King. And if you know anything about Martin Luther King,
That's a pretty busy thoroughfare.
That's a busy street.
Very busy.
So my mom eventually found me, and she put me in the car, and she took me to the library, the Medgar Evers Library, actually.
Yeah.
And she told the librarian what had just happened, and she said, I want her to see that there's more to the world than what she just witnessed. So I feel like books are the best way to do that. And it really changed my life.
So what you're saying is your mother's brilliant.
She is.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, because I mean, what a perfect way to handle that situation.
Yeah. I'm thankful that she did.
Yeah.
I really am, because it really did open my eyes to the world and let me see that there was more to the world than that.
Now, I asked her before we came on air, when did she notice that you could write?
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty young, wasn't it?
Yeah. She would read bedtime stories to me when I was like 4 or 5 years old. And if I wasn't satisfied with the way the book ended, I would say, okay, let me tell you my version. Because I thought I could do it better. So I was basically telling fan fiction at 4 or 5 years old.
And you know what? After reading your book, I have a feeling you probably could have. But, you know, Harry Potter, you know, my kids love Harry Potter.
Mm-hmm.
You loved Harry Potter when you were young, because I guess just judging by your age, you were a teenager when it started coming out.
I was around 10 when the first book came out, and I kind of grew with Harry.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, it was like the one series that I stuck with it, and it was like when Harry was going through puberty, I was going through puberty, so I understood his anger. You know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and he did, because he saw death, and he had to deal with a lot of really tough issues. And I remember reading a quote where you were reading it while gunshots were going off outside.
Right.
Okay.
I did. I read it a lot. It distracted me from that.
Yeah.
And Harry encouraged me, because I was like, if he could go through the things he's dealing with, I can deal with what I'm dealing with, you know. But yeah, I use those books definitely to escape. And I'm thankful to J.K. Rowling for that. So if she's somehow watching this broadcast in Mississippi, please know you changed my
She's
life.
a huge fan.
I know.
Yeah. I hear from her at least every week with suggestions, you know, because she's kind of bored these days.
Oh, yeah.
But you have a theory about the different houses.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tell me that.
They're gangs. I mean, the Hogwarts houses are gangs. If you look at the culture of them, they follow gang culture to a T. They have the colors. They have the same don't snitch mentality. Mm-hmm. They have the same ride or die mentality. That's a gang.
Yeah, exactly. And that theory was presented to J.K. Rowling, wasn't it?
It was. A friend of hers who's a writer gave it to her, showed her a screen cap of it, and she thought it was the funniest thing that she had read. And I thought, wow, my life has been made, so I don't think anything can top that.
Really? What else are you going to get for Christmas this year? I mean, I think you pretty much are done.
Yeah.
There are some lines in the book. You can't snitch if you don't know anything. Mm-hmm. There's really some profound, I mean, for somebody, you're 30.
Yes.
I guess I'm allowed to say that, right?
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay to say it for the home state folks.
Yeah, exactly. You get to be my age. You're not allowed to say that age. But there's a lot of wisdom in that book. Where did you pick this up? Just through the years, or how?
I would say it was instilled in me through my mom and my grandmother, and through hip hop in some ways.
Yeah,
you know,
you're a big Tupac fan.
Yeah, I am, and I studied a lot of Pac.
Yeah,
and I studied the people that Pac studied, so it gave me a lot of wisdom in a lot of ways.
He was such a complex character. I mean, he loved Les Mis.
He did.
Yeah.
And he loved Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and a lot of people don't know that. Yeah. And he was still a walking, talking contradiction like many of us are, but he was definitely more complex than people give him credit for being.
And you wanted to write like he did.
Yeah, I do.
Why?
I do. What I love about Tupac, you know, if you talk to hip hop heads, as we call them, they'll say, well, he wasn't a lyricist, you know.
Yeah.
And you look at his rhymes, maybe not, you know. But what I loved about him was he was complex in his music.
Yeah.
One song can make you laugh, another can make you cry, another can make you angry, another can make you think. And I think that the best books do that. I think the best books, when we pick them up, they get all of those emotions out of us. And he was an artist in that way, and I want to be one too. So I often say I want to make people uncomfortable like Pac made people uncomfortable. Yeah. I want them to think and laugh and be angry when they pick up my book.
This is the first time we've officially met.
Yes.
I tried to meet you at the Mississippi Book Festival, except there was a line to Mars of young teen girls all wanting to get, I mean, that had to make you as proud as anything that you've done because you know they're reading.
It does. It's the best thing, especially being home and having that happen.
Yeah.
Not just Black girls either, white girls,
Right.
Latino girls, and then even boys. I've had so many kids say, thank you for this book because it's the first time I've seen myself in a book. You know, I had young ladies who presented me artwork that they did based on the cover.
Yeah.
And I was honored. I have it on display in my house now, you know, but to hear that and then to have teachers say, this is the one book my reluctant readers have read,
Right.
you know, and then have teachers here in Mississippi say, you have no idea what it means for my students to know that you're doing something like this and you're from here. It's the best. I mean, the New York Times list is great, but that's honestly the best. So I loved being at the festival and getting to meet all those kids.
That was, and it was fun for me too, just to sit there and see them because they had big smiles on their face, and when they met you, it was like they were meeting a rock star. It was. Talk about the topics in the book are tough, and there's a lot of stuff, and we live in this world where everybody's uptight. They like to ban stuff and everything else, but you know, I was sitting there reading it, and of course the uptight guy in me, which it's there, I have to admit. I was thinking, oh, but then I was thinking, no, wait a minute, the kids have got to face worse than this now, don't they?
Yeah. They do. They do. I recently I had a radio interview and I mentioned, I said there are 92 F-bombs in the book and 199 instances of the S word. But there have been 926 police killings this year. Right. I think that number is more important to discuss.
So we tend to get upset about things sometimes that don't matter and then kind of gloss over. We put a hashtag on it and then we're good.
Yeah. Right. And I think we have to give our kids more credit. They can handle more than we think they can. I've had some of the most profound conversations about this book with teenagers. Right. A 13-year-old told me something that opened my eyes.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. A 13-year-old told me about the entire thing of, you know, I didn't think before that snitching was good, but then I saw that Star snitched on the cop. And I said, oh, maybe I should snitch on the bad people in my neighborhood who do bad things because who's to determine what's bad and what's not, and who's to determine who's the bad guy? And a 13-year-old said this to me. Yeah. And I said, wow. I know. So we need to give them more credit.
I know. I was thinking when I was 13 years old, I was just worried about getting acne. I lived a sheltered life.
When I was 13, I was obsessed with Little Bow Wow. So
Okay. You had a much cooler life than I did, obviously. I do detect that you're a bit of a Fresh Prince fan, though, just from the book, because it does tend to pop up quite a bit.
Yeah, I love the Fresh Prince, but I think what I love so much about the Fresh Prince was that it gave us a different view of a Black family than we were used to seeing, and through Will and Carlton, those two characters, it gave us these two very different glimpses at what Blackness sometimes looks like. Yeah, you know, and I kind of wanted to mimic that with Star's uncle and her dad. So I say her dad is Will, her uncle is Carlton.
Well, and one thing I enjoy about the characters, and a lot of times it would be tempting if you're writing the story to make two-dimensional bad guys, which you sometimes see in the news. The young man who was shot was a good kid, but he was also dealing drugs. Yeah. So, I mean, that's not an easy answer for people. So, and that's what I enjoyed about it. It challenges the reader to understand a little bit deeper than just skimming along the surface.
Oh, yeah. I think if we look at people the same way, there's more to it than what we always see at first glimpse. Right. And I think for me, one of my jobs as a writer is to help people understand those stereotypes that they so often throw on people. Right. So if Khalil was real, Khalil probably would have been a stereotypical victim, and all of the bad things he did would have been on display. But I want to show you the human at the heart of it.
There was a very powerful, to begin with, and just to set it up, it starts at a party. And Star's at a party where she normally is used to going to parties at her school. So it's a little bit different atmosphere. Right. And of course, she has her sneakers on. Yeah. Big time, very important. And of course, there was one thing, I've got the quote right here, saying, every time a sneaker is cleaned improperly, a kitten dies. Okay, I laughed out loud on that line. But it's obviously the value that she puts on the sneakers and everything else. The shooting happens. Yeah. Blood everywhere. There's blood on her sneakers. And at that moment, you realize, okay, suddenly she's had to grow up. Yeah. In a way that's not really fair. Right.
That was, for me, I felt that was a big growth moment for her. Yeah. Because teenagers, for a lot of them, that's what they get hung up on, their appearance, things like that. And all of a sudden, it doesn't even matter anymore. She throws the shoes away. And for me, in a way, that was almost like her throwing part of her innocence away.
Right. You wrote this back before, obviously, like I mentioned before Black Lives Matter became, before the shootings really came to the forefront. How did you have such a sense? I mean, you created a scenario that has played out now over and over and over.
Yeah.
How did you have that foresight to be able to see that happening?
I didn't. It's interesting to me looking back on it because when I wrote the short story, Oscar Grant was a huge deal because it was caught on camera.
Right.
Cell phones were just starting to have cameras on them, and although it was a grainy video, there was a video, and that's really what made his case so shocking for so many people. But these are things that have been happening in communities like mine for decades. It's just nobody had proof of it, and now we're seeing it more and more. I did not know, though, that, we would have this whole movement or that people would become hashtags and things like that. I just hoped that maybe now, after Oscar happened, maybe people would start paying attention. And I wanted to write the book to help people pay even a little bit more attention.
Talk about the writing of the short story. We're going back to Belhaven. Number one, you apparently had some pretty good teachers. Because they really helped. You had one professor that gave you some really sage advice because you're writing fantasy at this point, and he said, okay, write stories that make a difference.
Yeah, his name is Howard Barr. He's actually an author from here in Mississippi.
He sure is.
Yeah. And we had a conversation one day, and I told him, I said, I don't know if people care about things that are happening in my community.
Yeah.
And he said, well, do you care?
Right.
I said, absolutely. He said, well, why not write about them?
Right.
Because you can give voices to the voiceless. So that stuck with me. I think I owe him a check.
You also, too, and I've seen this in an interview, if it's not your story to tell, just because you get the idea doesn't mean that it's your story to tell. Explain that.
Well, in children's publishing, especially right now, we have what's called the Own Voices movement. And that's promoting books by marginalized authors written about characters who share the same marginalization. But that's not to say that people can't write outside themselves. I think people can.
Right.
But I always say, if you're going to write about a character who is not like you, do some research.
Amen.
I mean, if I was writing a legal thriller and here I am without a law degree, I'm going to consult a lawyer. Trust me, I consulted plenty while writing The Hate You Give.
Yeah.
So I ask people to have the same respect. It's really about respect. Respect the characters you're writing about. Don't depend on stereotypes. If you're going to write about real three-dimensional people, you need to meet and talk with real three-dimensional people so you can get it right.
Makes for better prose, too.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And especially for me, writing for teenagers can pick up on phoniness so quickly.
Very good. Yes, I have a few in my house. I understand.
Yeah, and if you get it wrong with them, you've lost them. So for me, it's really important.
Well, judging by that line at the book signing, I think you got it right.
Thank you.
But that is important. And I think, because if you're trying to tear down stereotypes, if you're creating them, how are you going to do that?
Exactly.
So that's, how long did it take you to write the book?
It took me 6 months to do that first draft, but
Really?
what I tell aspiring writers all the time is that the biggest part of writing is actually editing.
Yeah.
So it took me about a year after that 6 months, so about a year and a half altogether, to do edits. And that includes the edits I did with my editor and my agent, altogether a year and a half to get this book to the point where it was publishable. But now I'm working on my second one, and it has taken me a year and a half just to get through a first draft.
Okay, let's talk about that. I call it the Harper Lee syndrome. You get that first book, and I mean, it's like fantastic. It's great. It's done so well. Is there any pressure now on the second book?
At first there was, and technically there still is, but I'm not allowing myself to feel it.
Yeah.
What I've decided is that for the second book, I'm writing it for me, first and foremost, and I'm writing it for those kids who tell me, your first book was the first time I saw myself in a book. I just want to read more stuff about me.
Right.
So I'm writing it for them. I mean, the accolades and things are great, but I really want to write this one just for them and me.
I get, and I understand that completely as somebody who's drawn and written my whole life. I mean, if I start trying to do it for other people, then suddenly it'll ring hollow.
Yeah. And honestly, in some ways, I have taken the positive things that people have said about The Hate You Give, and I'm using it now to come at them and challenge them with the second book. So I had a lot of people say what I loved about The Hate You Give was that Star comes from this 2-parent household that's really stable.
Right.
So me, I think, well, what about those kids who don't?
Yeah.
Well, let me make you think about them for a second. Here you go.
Yeah. So this isn't The Hate You Give Part 2.
No. It's just set in the same neighborhood.
And how tempting was that to do that? I mean, because sometimes you see that people like, hey, well, okay, I've got a niche now. I'm just going to write the same book over and over and over.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was a little tempting, but I felt I would be doing those kids a disservice because they deserve to see themselves in so many different ways.
How involved are you with the movie production? Tell us a little bit about that too.
I am a consultant for the movie. I'm an executive producer, but I do more consulting. I don't make decisions.
Nice.
That's why if you go on my Twitter page, my name says I don't cast films. You know?
Yeah, I saw that.
Right.
I was hoping for a job here because I thought you'd be impressed with this interview.
I am so sorry. I would have casted you as her father, but I have no control over it.
You know, I don't think I
made it work.
That's true. Digital effects, anything's possible.
We could have changed it and
Exactly.
said she was biracial.
It wouldn't destroy the book at all. No, it'd be perfect. It's kind of like when you're watching a movie and suddenly some star shows up and you're like, how did Ted Danson get in this?
But I didn't control anything, but I had such a great team building the movie and putting the movie together that I trusted them completely. We have an awesome director. His name is George Tillman Jr. Yeah. He did Soul Food, Barbershop, Luke Cage, This Is Us. So he has his resume.
He's got some chops.
Yeah. But they consulted me during the script writing process. They brought on a writer actually here from Mississippi. Her name is Tina Mabry. She is a screenwriter and a director, and they brought her in because they wanted that Mississippi flavor. You know?
Exactly. Where's it going to be? I mean, the book is going to be set in Mississippi.
It's not.
Okay.
It's a fictional town for the movie, but in the book I don't mention a city or town, but it's got a lot of Mississippi influence.
Well, yes.
Yeah, there's a restaurant really influenced by bullies in the book.
Exactly.
So
I know. I got so hungry when I was reading about that. Thank you very much on that. Speaking of the Mississippi influence on it, you grew up near where Meg Rivers lived.
Yes.
I was talking to your mom a little bit before we started interviewing. She heard, well, tell us what she heard the night that he was shot.
My mom heard the gunshots that killed Meg Rivers on that night.
Wow.
She was a kid. And there was a lot of rumblings around the neighborhood before it even happened.
Yeah.
People had a feeling that something was going to happen. There were rumors spreading. And my mom was a kid at the time, and my grandmother was involved in the movement in a way. And she was supposed to go to a meeting that Mr. Evers was having that night. Yeah. And my grandfather got the call saying, no, she should not go. Wow. People need to stay inside. And that was the same night he was killed. So my mom heard the gunshots, and I don't think that's something she'll ever forget.
I could imagine.
Yeah.
The book is dedicated to your grandma.
Yes.
It says, for Grandma who showed me there can be light in the darkness.
Yeah. My grandmother was definitely a rock in my life. Yeah. When she passed, though, she had Alzheimer's. Yeah. And what really inspired me, even during her struggle with losing her memory and all of this, she kept her faith. And she always, even when she couldn't remember me, she remembered her faith. She remembered the Lord. And that showed me that there's still light in the darkness. There's still something to hold on to, even when there's darkness all around. So for me, I wanted to dedicate that book to her because she was my light in a lot of the darkness I went through. So I hope that the book, for some people, is some light in the midst of the darkness that we're going through.
Yeah, I was about to say, because that was one thing I got from the book, is even during some of the darkest moments, there was that humanity, almost. And I was thinking about Tupac's quote, and I don't normally quote Tupac, so don't think.
That's okay.
No, it's just, you're looking at me going, okay. But he was talking about how, if we saw a rose growing through the concrete, we would celebrate it. But we don't celebrate people that come up out of the ghetto necessarily.
Right.
And so here's a young lady who absolutely survived something absolutely horrible, but really deserves to be celebrated for her strength and her courage.
Yeah, definitely. That poem and that quote of his stuck with me, especially as I was writing it.
Yeah.
I see every character in there, especially the kids, as roses in concrete, and I want us to celebrate kids like them. Yeah. When I was writing Star, I thought about this young lady, Rachel Gentile, who was Trayvon Martin's best friend.
That's right.
And she was criticized more for how she spoke as opposed to the fact that she was speaking.
Yeah.
So I feel like Rachel was a rose in concrete, and instead people focused on her damaged petals instead of the fact this is a rose in the concrete.
Yeah, definitely. your new book. Tell us a little preview of it. You've touched on it a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you don't want to give away too much, obviously.
Yeah. It's called On the Come Up. It's set to come out next year. And it's about a 16-year-old girl who finds her voice and her power through hip hop.
Yeah.
For me, growing up, hip hop was a mirror to see myself. It gets criticized, rightfully so, but it told the stories that were happening around me when books didn't. You know, I tell people all the time, Twilight was the big book when I was a kid, but my mom wouldn't let me date a guy that old, so I couldn't connect with it.
Or a vampire.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I couldn't connect with it, but I could connect with a Tupac song or Jay-Z song. So for me, this book is my ode to that and the fact that it gave me that voice in that mirror.
So what's next for you?
What's next? I get a break for a little bit.
Really?
But
For 15 minutes?
Yeah, for a little bit. But next is definitely the second book and the movie next year.
That's awesome. And so have you been able to take your mom on some of these trips?
Yeah, she actually was on set with me in Atlanta. We spent 3 weeks on the movie set in Atlanta.
Nice.
And so my mom got to hug Common.
And she probably enjoyed every second of it.
She took pictures with everybody. So she really did. She got a chance to experience that magic with me.
When's the movie coming out?
We don't have a date yet, but it's possibly next fall.
I'm just thrilled for you because I was about to say, you know, to be #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, have National Book Award long list. I think that's correct. I may have gotten that backwards. But I think, that, like you said before, I think the fact that you're allowing other kids to read and getting them to read and giving them something they can identify with, that's, like I said, that's what makes you most proud.
Thank you. It does. It does. So I want to keep doing it for them.
Well, we got 30 seconds. Any final thoughts?
My final thought, I want to just let everyone know, and I want to encourage people, empathy is more powerful than sympathy. Yeah. And we need a lot more of that.
Amen. Angie, it's been an honor to be able to talk to you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you.